The Report by Jessie Pope. We met twice in a crowd, and we thought they would shun us. We stormed, they would not budge, but they started to gun us. They charged, we did not wait, there was no time to potter. We thought we were hot stuff, but the Tommies were hotter. We're nan, they've got us tight, and we're sadder and wiser. And you are the cause of this anguish, my Kaiser. Jessie Pope was an English journalist, author, and poet known for her patriotic pieces of writing throughout the First World War. She published her poems in the Daily Mail, a very popular British newspaper. The Report, which was part of a two-part collection of poems entitled A Sing-Song, was also published in the Daily Mail. According to research, Jessie Pope wrote and published the poem after the British captured 1,500 Bavarians who were part of the German army during the Battle of Ypres. One could not specify after which battle this happened, since there were many battles in this area, but we can presume this happened in the beginning of the war, since the tone of the poem glorifies the Brits, allowing for us to interpret that the battle was successful from the British perspective. The First Battle of Ypres in late autumn of 1914 fits this description the best. Jessie Pope is known for her patriotic and nationalist pieces of writing. Jessie Pope writes her poem from the point of view of the German army about how great and undefeatable the British army is. This is essentially a propaganda poem trying to lift the spirit of the British soldiers currently at the front, or it tries to convey to the men that have not enlisted yet that Germans are scared of them, the British have basically won the war, and that there's nothing to be afraid of when joining the British Army. Basically, the topic of this poem is glorifying the British Army, specifically from the German point of view, while the theme of the poem is basically propaganda and enlistment. This poem is trying to convey a message to all men who have not enlisted in the army yet, that they should, and that in order to be one of those soldiers to come back winning the Germans, they need to do that as soon as possible in order to continue this long winning streak. This poem is a narrative poem. It tells a story of how the two armies met, fought, and the British came out on top. And the title is The Report. Thus, the author's intention is to create a basic level of trust and reliability between her and the reader. Because the report was something used in order to convey news and details about what was going on the front to the citizens. Thus, such a title allows for there to be a much easier leeway of communication between Jessie Pope, the author, and the reader. So what does this poem mean? This is the beginning of the story. The two armies meet, and to Germany's surprise, Britain stood up for itself and did not go down without a fight. They meet twice in a crowd. In this line right here, we can see a metaphor for battlefield. The two armies did not actually meet in a crowd. Maybe a crowd of soldiers, but not a typical busy market crowd that you'd see on a daily basis. No, this was an actual clash between two opposing armies on an actual area where guns went off and there was a lot of blood spilled. We can see through the stanza that primarily the German army was not very serious about fighting the British, and it simply wants to dangle their power in front of them. Author suggests an unfounded arrogance from the opposing side. As you can see in this line, we thought they would shun us. The Germans thought that they would easily be able to win this confrontation because they thought the British were scared of them. They thought everyone was scared of them. They stormed, but they did not budge. So the British did not go down without a fight, and they started to gun us. So they fought back. We can interpret it, and we thought they would shun us, but they started to gun us as a dissonance. It is a harsh, discordant combination of sounds. It emphasizes the rhythmical structure of the poem, as well as it allows for there to be a crisp ending for these two lines, so shun us and gun us. We can also see an anaphor throughout the stanza and basically throughout the whole poem. So we met, we stormed, we thought, and also they would not budge, they started to gun us, etc. There's also a juxtaposition in this stanza, again with shun us and gun us. So these two are opposites. The Germans thought that the British would run away from them, that they would not fight, but instead they did, and in the author's opinion, they won, which I will discuss further on. Overall, from the perspective of Jessie Pope, when the Germans and British first met, straight away the British were undefeatable. Stanza 2 is evidently a continuation of the story of how the German and the British army met. This stanza can be seen as dedicated to completely bashing the German army and basically breaking down the pedestal that they kept themselves so high up on before they met the British. The first part of the stanza, they charged with no weight, there wasn't time to potter, indicates that the British army quickly sprung into action and without hesitation began to fight the Germans, something that was not expected by the opposing army. No time to potter can be interpreted as there was absolutely no time for the Germans to stop and think about their actions because the British were that strong and fast, which again benefits the whole message of how strong the British army is and how great it would be to have more soldiers in order to continue the glorification of this army. No time to potter is also a synecdoche, a figure of speech that is used a lot in both literature and spoken language, and it adds a rhythmical value to the poem. So when reading the stanza, one can emphasize the rhyme much easier. This shows that the Germans were all talk and no action, because basically once the British army attacked and began to fight, the Germans realized that they weren't that great, something that Jessie Pope reiterates throughout many of her poems. We were hot stuff is seen as a dead metaphor, a type of metaphor that makes you forget the two items in question are really separate items. This is evidently a metaphor for the Germans thought they were so good, they were successful, but then they ran into the Tommies, meaning the British army, a very common term for that army, and they realized the Brits were much better. So basically, the evident focus of this stanza is to reiterate how strong the British were and how poorly the Germans stood against them. This is the third and final stanza of the poem. The story between the British and the German army ends with the British basically winning the confrontation, and more specifically the war. The German army are stuck and can't get out of this awkward situation and essentially blame the Emperor Kaiser for this ultimate loss. The ending of the stanza is directly aimed at Kaiser, so the author speaks directly to Kaiser, the author being the German army, reiterating the embarrassment of the army as well as the stupidity of the emperor, thinking that he could actually beat the United Kingdom. Jessie Pope tries to convey to readers one last time that the war is basically won by the British. There's no way around it, and even the Germans know it, according to this poem. They've got us tight is a metaphor for we're stuck. This is a very common metaphor used in poetry, and it also adds arithmetical value to the stanza. So again, it allows for me and other readers to read this in a much more arithmetic manner. Kaiser is an allusion, so my Kaiser. It references to an actual historical figure, so in this case, the Emperor of Germany during the First World War. It is also an apostrophe since the author, Jessie Pope, but in this case it is the German army. It is addressing through the Kaiser through the poem, but he is not actually present. He's not actually there listening to what the German army are saying. He is simply mentioned. The basic understanding of the third stanza is that the Germans have lost, the British have won, and it's all Kaiser's fault because he's the one who sent his army off in the first place. This again adds a glorifying definition to the British army, and it tells readers that how great the British are to have no worries about the war, and it also promotes the enlistment of other soldiers because who would not want to be the part of the army who defeated the Germans? So overall, the story ends with the British winning and the Germans finding out that they were not very smart to pick a fight with England. As mentioned before, this is essentially a propaganda poem. It communicates to readers that the British army is very successful, that it has basically won the war, and that Germany fears them. It also promotes enlistment amongst men who have not done so yet. The whole poem is a juxtaposition, meaning there is a constant alternation of opposites, since this is kind of a conversation between Germany and England. For example, we thought they would shun us, but they started to gun us. As I mentioned before, this is a clear juxtaposition. For example, we stormed. They would not budge. This is also a juxtaposition, not a very evident one, however, one can see the opposites of the two actions. And overall, this is a completely game of opposites. For example, the German army thought that the British would be quiet, they wouldn't do anything, they would simply sit back and let the Germans defeat them. But no, the British army did not sit back. They fought them and they ended up defeating them. At least that's what this poem portrays. So if one were to see it this way, we could say that the whole poem is a play of juxtaposition. There is no evident visual imagery in this poem. There's hardly any kind of description of background or any type of imaginative details. However, one can see for themselves how the whole confrontation would have gone down. So, for example, the British and the German army met on a battlefield. The Germans stormed, so they fought them. The British would not budge, so just this kind of interpretation of each line allows for us to have a clear image of how the British and the German army fought in the end. There's also a wide range of anaphor in the whole poem, as mentioned before. So we met, we thought, we stormed, we did not, we thought, we were hot stuff, etc. And also, they would not budge, they started to gun us, they got us tight, etc. So there's a large use of anaphor in this poem. Overall, Jessie Pope once again tries to promote enlistment, so it tries to glorify the British army, and she tries to, and is actually pretty successful at, making the readers believe that the British army are very successful and that there is nothing to worry about when one joins the war or if one sits at home and is waiting for news. Jessie Pope uses a wide range of techniques in order to convey her message of how the Germans have been defeated, how the British are overall a great army, and also successfully promotes enlistment amongst all the men at the home front, as well as provides citizens with the nice thoughts of the British soldiers not being in jeopardy. The use of metaphors allows for there to be a much more mythical value to this poem, as well as the apostrophe, meaning um, the addressing of Kaiser. This brings a much stronger meaning to the poem. Overall, this poem, being written from the German perspective to the British, has a very ironic kind of side to it, since the Germans thought this, but they ended up only doing this. Overall, this poem allows for readers to see an example of what a typical propaganda poem was during World War I.